I would like to start by addressing the misconception behind the expression Bantu just for a little bit. Bantu is a meaningful expression that we use to address one another in everyday language, and it is not useless, and we love to use it towards one another. It is a term of affection and endearment when we use it towards one another. So we are now educating everyone because it seems our silence has led to a lot of misunderstandings regarding things that we thought were pretty obvious. We are usually told to leave things alone, as in gamujilega, and not to talk about bad things, malweza. But this hasn't helped us because we end up being discriminated against, abused, stolen from, unalived, threatened, displaced, and I am personally done with the silence because the earth, the guardians expanded with us, has shrunk, and there is no more room, or there's no more privilege for silence. We don't have the privilege to be silent anymore. So I will use this video to explain how so many people in Africa speak a Bantu derived language and how the term Bantu may have been misunderstood and misappropriated. So let's get started. So one reason many Africans speak a Bantu derived language is because of the high abduction rates of preteen and teen Proto-Bantu children along the Eastern, Great Lakes, Lower Congo, Lower Angola, Southern African regions, which was their home. These children had learned some of their mother tongue by the age of abduction, which they took with them, and we see this in the way the languages are used along with their admixtures from their abductors and other abductees. These abductions resulted in the presence of developmental and adolescent grammar and not mature grammar amongst most of the derived languages. So the lack of mature grammar is evident because there is usually and almost always an overgeneralization, misuse, misunderstanding of the expressions and concepts, the most famous of these being Bantu, which doesn't mean people. But for children with limited understanding who used and heard it applied to the people within their communities, they thought it meant people because they had not yet reached the age where they would be taught the spiritual concepts and its spiritual meaning, as in it means the ideal manifestation of the Ba'ila in us. This is similar to when a culture has a term for older people, for example. As a child, most people would think this is what all old people are called until they learn different. And this is what happened to these children. And this shows up in most of the derived languages' lack of spiritual terms, and this shows their limitation because the language sort of froze at the preteen or adolescent level in these cases. And this happened because, like most cultures, the spiritual elements can bring unease for children who prefer the security of the predictable and familiar. As a result, they weren't directly taught deeper concepts because these often have references to the unfamiliar. This is why children are taught or told fables in African cultures at least, which use animals and things that are friendly and familiar to help explain these concepts in a way that assuages the fear of variables or change, because children like the predictable, familiar. It gives them a sense of security. And also, many languages also have limited slang vocabulary and use incorrect syntax, which is how children still learning a language speak. For example, in the Bemba language, or the Bemba group of languages, people use the phrase mumutwe when it's just mutwe, as in head. Mumutwe is like saying in the head. So that is incorrect grammar, and we pick up on it, and that tells us a lot about the people and how they kind of came to speaking this language. And also, there's another example I wanted to talk about. That really nice, catchy Kumama Papa song, which helps us understand the state of mind of the first speakers who brought this language into this culture, or this community rather. It uses some scary words. We consider the words used actually scary and uneasy and unnerving. For example, the first line goes azangawo. I always get this part wrong because I correct the grammar. Let me say it the way they say it. Azwanga wo mwana. A refers to a third person. Wo mwana is incorrect grammar. I think this wo changed from o mwana, and this offers a clue actually to the population that was abducted into this one, and that brought this expression in, because o mwana is a very common expression amongst cattle herders. I mean, everyone's a cattle herder, but I mean the actual men who go herd the cows, the ones who actually do the work, every day. This is the kind of language they use. It's very you'd consider sort of loose language. It's very easygoing language, okay? It's full of these little terms of endearment, and it's very calming and easygoing. So these were most likely the kids who spent a lot of time cattle herding, because this was around the age that boys started herding cattle, that is between 9 and 13 years old, or 14 years old. When they're 7 years old, between 7 and about 9, or the preteen years, they are herding goats, and then they move on to cattle. And then after about 14, 15, they move on to the bulls, because the bulls were more dangerous. At least that's how most people did it. And because of this, they were hanging out with the older boys, and their vocabulary reflects this, and the use of omwana and zwanga, uzwanga, or wanga. And these terms are used by cattle herders more than any other group, because wanga or wanga is a verb that refers to catching or taking captive, and cattle herders are always catching cattle, and they add the zu to soften this uneasy action, because zu is a synonym for light, as in izuba. So it lights up the act of catching, so it doesn't bring unease and it doesn't seem frightening, because if someone catches you, it's frightening, especially if they do it when you are not expecting it. And then we have omwana, which is a sing-song calming expression, and it is always important for the cattle herders to maintain calm cattle, especially with the bulls, because the meja or bullhorns are very dangerous once the bull gets agitated and point those forward. So it was very important for them to have sort of a very happy-go-lucky attitude about them, because their energy transferred to the cattle they were herding. And this is why cattle herding is a rite of passage for Proto-Bantu boys, because the bulls and the cows teach emotional regulation, instill discipline, responsibility, and foresight, among many other virtues, which make a Valombwana, or the best of men. So these abductions also resulted in a phenotypic shift in some Proto-Bantu populations, which is why some Proto-Bantu are mistaken for different people, and different people are mistaken for Proto-Bantu. And there seem to have been waves that brought about this change. The initial Zanji invasion, which brought with it the language of the invaders and created admixture with the Proto-Bantu, and also, in some cases, people from different islands, because the Zanji were seafaring people who abducted people from different islands too. And those were their rowers. Those vessels had to be moved somehow, and that's why they were in the business of abductions. Then what followed this was the abduction of women and children, and these were Proto-Bantu women and children, which added the Proto-Bantu language into that mix. Since the men were unalived and the children were soldiers who were also eventually unalived in the inter-Zanji wars, because these would split up and then they would fight each other, which would result in very few Proto-Bantu men being left. And then came the slave trade, which needed to replenish those numbers for these new groups. And so a high number of people from West Africa were trafficked into Eastern Africa. And by this point, they find the descendants of the Proto-Bantu women and the first abductors and some of the people who were abducted from other places too. And this created this genetic change or shift. And in addition to West Africa's son and Proto-Bantu women who were also brought in, because at this point the Proto-Bantu population is diminishing, right? And so we see increases in DNA from West Africa, Proto-Sudanic, and other places adjacent or wherever the Zanji could have traveled to. So we see these new DNA clusters in Proto-Bantu territory, and these people are now speaking Bantu Derived language, and that's why it didn't make sense for a lot of people, and it needed to be explained. We are certain that the language was initially carried into these populations by the children, because records tell us that the children were targeted for abductions by the Zanji and the Jaga, and later the Jaga-derived columns who continued this practice. So Bantu isn't a meaningless term assigned or derived by European linguists. They may have found it a convenient term to use to describe people speaking similar languages, and this unintentionally propagated its minimization and general use without understanding why it got this way. The children brought it, they abducted children, and they thought it meant people, and it didn't. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Please share, and if you liked this video enough to show your support, our Ko-fi link is in the description box below. Sources are also in the description box. Thanks for watching.